I went and visited a group of reformers in the most left coast city in America, in the place in which referendums and initiatives are the home in some ways, in San Francisco. A group of reformers had recognized that the electoral system in San Francisco tends to be dominated by two parties. It dominated by people who were rich, it was dominated by people who were white, and it didn't tend to represent the nature of San Francisco. Now, if they'd been British, they would have been organising fringe meetings and lobbying them, and they'd be doing all that. Instead, they put together a campaign, they went into schools, they went into community groups. First of all, they forced a commission on something which was set up, and then they actually put initiative on the ballot to have introduction of single transferable vote in San Francisco. They had the referendum, and they lost. Yeah, they did lose. A few years later, they had another referendum, and they've now introduced AV into San Francisco. And they're now in a situation where they will actually probably bring back SDV again and have another referendum on SDV. Now, I'm not saying that San Francisco and the way of doing it is perfect, but for me, as someone looking at issues trying to introduce constitutional change, it gives you a difference in terms of power. One is that you can lobby, you can try and persuade, or you can become an elected politician, but your role in policy making is zero. Or the other route, where there is a possibility of change. Now, you then get into a whole big discussion about what that change involves, what the safeguards are, how many signatures you have to raise, how long it takes. I mean, the problem with talking about this subject in Britain is people think that referendums or citizen initiatives are like kind of giant opinion polls. They're quick. You know, you have suddenly a paedophile case happens, you had a referendum on it, and you suddenly get a really bad law. What we're talking about, actually there were a couple of cases in things which Parliament has passed, and dangerous dogs, etc., which are exactly like that. Basically, on the whole, quick lawmaking is bad lawmaking, whether it's by elected representatives or by the people themselves. What citizen initiatives are actually talking about is a process which is long. On the whole, you're talking about 2.5 years for a campaign. Not a quick thing. You know, you're talking about, in the case of the United Kingdom, if you were having to raise a petition of 5%, now that's the figure, I don't plug that out of the air, that's the figure which the government already has to introduce an elected mayor in Britain. And there's a referendum in a few weeks' time in Darlington, that sexy northern town, to actually have an elected mayor. Not introduced by politicians, introduced by the people of Darlington. Now, I happen to be extremely ambivalent and probably anti-elected mayors, but the fact that they've actually done it themselves, I think is an interesting process, and I think it shows you that it can be done in Britain. Now, 5% at the national level here would be it would be just over 2 million signatures. Now, as good campaigners in this room, you can tell me how easy it is to raise 2 million signatures. This is not easy. You'd have a year to do it. You couldn't take it longer than a year because the law would prevent you doing it. Even then, if the sort of proposals which we've got at the Power Commission were adopted, you would be in a situation where the politicians at the first stage would actually get to debate the issue first, and then put it back to the people, and then, only then, if that situation, would you then have another petition which would then raise having a referendum. So you're talking about a process which is long and is deliberative. I agree there are dangers of letting people into a populist debate. I happen to think that sovereignty lies with the people. People give up their sovereignty to elected representatives, and there may be, in some circumstances, people should have the right to take that sovereignty back and exercise it themselves. Now, we can then get into how can we use this tool if we think it's a good tool for Britain. I happen to agree with David. I don't think you should use it for setting of budgets. I think there may be times when you want to do things around it, maybe other techniques to use, but I don't think on the whole that budgeting by citizen initiative is a good thing. But I do think that on a number of issues, locally or nationally, where politicians themselves, and where elected representatives themselves decide for one reason that they don't want to discuss a subject because there are no votes in it, that there should be an opportunity to actually put something onto the agenda. Now that could be really controversial and difficult issues like euthanasia at one end. I don't know what it could be. I can't see what the issues are. But the whole point is having the right people to do it. And I think one of the things I want to focus the discussion on is, if we do go down that route, what do we need to put in place to make it not a populist charter, but one which is part of a constitutional process, which safeguards it and actually has a debate in a way which actually allows you to let the people in, to share power with them, but without letting the four horsemen of the apocalypse ride loose and suddenly having us all in danger of introducing hanging. One simple thing on the hanging point is you could actually say that to have a citizen initiative, you can't have unintended consequences. So if you want to do something which is banned by treaty, then you have to remove the treaty first. In which case, if you wanted to get rid of hanging, you would have to leave the Council of Europe. Fine, you'd have to leave the European Union. That might be fine. But you'd have to do all those things first before you could deal with that issue. You couldn't choose an issue, have a citizen initiative on it, and say, oh, by the way, the consequence of that is you've got to leave all these things. Now that's adult decision making. And what we're talking about, at least what I'm talking about, is having a process which enables adults to discuss politics in a way which gives them power, but also gives them responsibility. And to quote Vernon Bognadour, he said, the arguments against referendums and citizen initiatives are the arguments against democracy. And ultimately, I think you have to decide, yes, let's have safeguards, let's have all the constitutional mechanisms you need, but do ultimately you trust the people to be adult and be involved in policy making? Or do you think actually all we can really trust them with is a vote to elect somebody else who can be trusted to take decisions on their part? Ultimately, I'm a constitutional populist and I'm with the people.